The most dangerous person in the world is the one they couldn't stop, even after watching their every move. Now imagine this for a moment. Chosen one. Picture a hawk circling high in the sky, convinced it can control every creature beneath it. It watches, it waits, it plots, but one day it spots a rare bird, unpredictable, untamed, moving in ways it's never seen before. The hawk doesn't dive to attack. It circles slower, it studies, and then it changes its mission entirely, not to stop the bird, but to get close enough to understand it. That bird, chosen one, is you. Here's a fact they don't want you to know. In high-level behavioral analysis, there's a category for people whose actions break predictive systems. You don't fit the patterns. You don't react the way the average person does. Even without meeting you, you influence people. Even without speaking, you shift the energy in the room. To them, that's not just unusual, it's unexplainable. And unexplainable is both a threat and a treasure. And thank you, chosen one. Don't forget to pay this message back by simply pressing the like and subscribe to help spread this message to more souls. It's the responsibility of all of us to spread the light. And thank you, chosen one, for being part of this mission. You are part of a force. So here's where it gets interesting. What started as surveillance has now turned into pursuit, but not the kind you think. We're not talking about your neighbor peeking through blinds or an ex scrolling through your feed at 2 a.m. No, this is a different level. We're talking about top-tier observers, agents, analysts, people trained to detect patterns in chaos, realizing the chaos was you, and realizing they weren't dealing with chaos at all, but with a kind of order they couldn't decode. You've been on their radar for a long time, longer than you think. They weren't just recording your actions, they were mapping your choices, trying to figure out how someone could move through storms without sinking, walk into hostile rooms without losing control, and somehow inspire people without even trying. You became a puzzle piece that didn't belong to the picture they thought they were building. And that's when everything changed. The fear they once had, it shifted. Curiosity took over. Respect crept in. They stopped asking, how do we contain this? And started asking, how do we get close enough to learn from this? You're not just a file in their database anymore. You're a case study in resilience, intuition, and precision. They've studied your setbacks, your comebacks, your silences, your sudden moves. Every step you've taken has been more than just a step. It's been a statement, one they couldn't ignore. And now, chosen one, they want to meet you. They want to look you in the eye, not as someone they were tracking, but as someone they've been learning from without even realizing it. They want to thank you, not because you worked for them, but because your existence proved something they didn't think was possible, that a single person, without an army, without an institution, could move the needle of an entire system just by being who they are. This video will take you inside that shift, how silent observation turned into open acknowledgement, how surveillance became respect, and how someone like you ended up rewriting the rules they were sworn to enforce. You weren't just another face in the crowd. You were the one that made them stop, take notes, and rethink everything. So lean in, chosen one. You're about to find out why the people trained to watch the world couldn't stop watching you. So, chosen one, are you ready to walk with me through this step by step? Because what I'm about to share isn't just a story, it's a map of the trail you've unknowingly blazed, the very path that made those top-level observers stop everything and watch. If you've ever felt eyes on you without knowing why, if you've ever sensed a presence studying your every move, then you'll want to hear every single word of this. Drop the number 777 in the comments if you're ready to uncover exactly why they couldn't look away. And if this message hits home, consider showing love to the force behind it with a super thanks, because these truths take time, energy, and relentless dedication to bring to light. Whether it's a single cent or more, it's not the number that matters. It's the signal you send that this mission is worth continuing. Remember, your support is the fuel that keeps this message reaching those who need it most. Now, lock in, because if you are truly the one they've been watching, you're going to feel that magnetic pull to stay with me until the very last second. Let's get started. Number 1, marked in red. You weren't just noticed, you were targeted. When they can't understand you, they fear you. When they can't control you, they mark you. And when they can't stop you, they watch you, waiting for you to slip. Chosen one, make no mistake. You didn't accidentally end up on their radar. You weren't just a random blip on their system. You were marked, flagged, stamped with an invisible warning label in rooms you'll never see, by people whose job titles you'll never hear. And here's the twist. They didn't flag you because you're dangerous in the way they want the world to believe. They flagged you because you're dangerous in the way that keeps them awake at night. Imagine this for a moment. There's a game being played, a game that's been running for generations. Most people don't even know they're players. They follow the rules without question, move where they're told, and smile on cue. But then, there's you. You're not reading from the same script. You're moving in patterns that don't match the design. You're slipping through gaps they didn't know existed. And in their world, that's not a quirk. That's a threat. You didn't just notice cracks in the wall, you started pulling at them. You asked questions no one wanted to answer. You saw the lies hidden beneath polished speeches and corporate smiles. You caught the shift in tone when someone's words didn't match their eyes. And you didn't let it slide. That alone made you an anomaly. And here's the part that burns them the most. You didn't get this insight from their books, their programs, or their systems. You didn't learn their way and then beat them at their own game. You remembered something they forgot. It was in you before they even noticed you. And when they realized you weren't learning truth, you were recalling it from somewhere they couldn't reach. Their grip slipped. Let's be clear, you weren't flagged like a troublemaker who starts fights in public or causes chaos on the streets. You weren't breaking laws in their legal books, but you were breaking the unspoken laws of control. You weren't supposed to see how this whole thing really works. You weren't supposed to know where the levers are or who's really pulling them. And you sure as hell weren't supposed to be able to explain it to others in a way that actually made sense. They observed you differently. While they put other people in boxes and stamped them with neat little labels, they couldn't figure out where to put you. Your stillness unnerved them. Your calm, laser-focused awareness felt offensive to them, like you weren't playing the part they assigned you. You didn't flinch when the script demanded fear. You didn't clap when the scene called for approval. And in their world, that's a glitch in the system. They tried studying you like a science project. They traced your movements, monitored your relationships, even tracked your digital footprint, hoping to predict your next step. But you never gave them the reaction they were expecting. When pressure hit, you didn't crumble. You disappeared into silence, recalibrating in ways they couldn't follow. When most people lashed out emotionally, you moved with surgical precision. And that scared them. Why? Because their entire profiling system depends on people moving from fear, craving approval, or feeding ego. But your moves didn't come from any of those places. They came from somewhere deeper. Call it instinct, call it strategy, call it a frequency they couldn't measure. And that's what made you uncontainable. They weren't scared you'd physically harm them. They were scared you'd wake people up. That just standing in a room, you'd shift the temperature of the conversation. That by existing as you are, people would start questioning things they'd accepted their whole lives. And once that kind of questioning starts, control begins to crumble. That's the real reason they marked you. Not because you were unpredictable, but because you were uncontrollable. They could track your path, but not your purpose. They could document your words, but not the force behind them. They could map your history, but not your destiny. And that made them nervous. They tried to replicate you, break you down into formulas, hoping they could turn your awareness into something they could own or weaponize. But no matter how close they got, they couldn't touch the source. And that infuriated them. Because in their world, everything has a source they can tap, a power they can drain. But not you. Your refusal to play by the rules isn't rebellion for the sake of rebellion. It's precision. It's knowing when to speak, when to vanish, when to strike, and when to wait. And that kind of patience is lethal in the eyes of those who need you to be reactive. So yes, chosen one, you were flagged as a threat. But understand, their definition of threat is the highest compliment you'll ever get from them. It means you're doing something they can't predict, can't replicate, and can't stop. It means you're moving in a way that forces them to adjust their entire system around you. And every time they adjust, they reveal more of themselves to you. You weren't just navigating the system, you were mapping it. You weren't just surviving within their boundaries, you were erasing them without even asking permission. And deep down, they know the truth. The longer you keep moving like this, the more people will see it's possible. The more people see it's possible, the weaker their control becomes. And that's why they watch you. That's why they've been tracking you like a shadow, not because they want to destroy you, but because, in some twisted way, they hope to understand you. They hope to figure out how you keep breaking their rules without breaking yourself. But here's what they'll never admit: they're already too late. Number 2. They couldn't read you because you weren't written in their language. The cleanest signal is the hardest to intercept and the hardest to corrupt. Chosen one, they didn't just watch you out of curiosity. They watched you with instruments. They watched you with systems. They watched you with tools built for one purpose: to find the flaw. And here's the thing: they were confident they'd find it. They always do. The only reason they can control the masses is because they've learned how to measure the dirt in their water. But what happens when they find a stream they can't pollute? Imagine this. A team of highly trained code breakers is given a new file to crack. They've broken thousands before. Every file has a pattern. Every person has a tell. Every life has a leak. But when they open yours, the screen doesn't show the usual chaos of scrambled data. It shows clarity, lines so straight, signals so sharp, they start to think the program's malfunctioning. They were trained to measure instability. They know how to detect anger hidden behind a smile, greed disguised as generosity, fear masked as arrogance. They live for the moment they catch a micro-expression that reveals the truth. But when their eyes landed on you, the readouts didn't make sense. You weren't erratic, but you weren't passive either. You weren't hostile, but you weren't a doormat. You weren't performing peace to look righteous. Yet, you radiated something calmer than peace itself. When someone's soul is in alignment, even silence becomes impossible to fake. You didn't fit in their neat little categories: trauma response, covert aggression, manipulative charm. They tried to check the boxes, but every single one came back blank. It wasn't that you were resisting their measurement, it was that you were breaking their measurement. The metrics were designed for noise, and you were transmitting pure frequency. Imagine a lie detector that never misses, except with one person. It works on criminals, politicians, con artists, and even the most disciplined undercover agents. But with you, the machine starts giving readings it's never seen before. At first, they assume it's a glitch. They recalibrate. They run the test again. Still nothing. No spikes, no false fronts, no hidden stress signatures, just a clean, consistent hum. That hum was you, and that hum made them nervous. See, chosen one, you weren't walking around with perfection. You weren't pretending to be untouched by life, but you were carrying something rarer, clarity. You had burned through the illusions that keep most people fogged. You weren't masking an agenda. You weren't projecting for approval. And because you weren't blasting static into the air, your signal came through too clear for their comfort. Clarity is the enemy of control because it can't be manipulated by distortion. Their tools glitched, not because you were hiding, but because you weren't hiding anything at all. And for them, that's worse than deception. Deception can be tracked. Purity, they have no manual for that. Imagine them in their control room, screens lit with data, expecting to catch the usual pulse of dysfunction, the emotional fingerprints of a soul still tangled in bitterness or ego. Instead, you showed up as something steady, something whole. They kept asking themselves, is this person real? Because in their training, this doesn't exist. People crack, people break, people bend. But here you were, aligned, aware, and untouchable. At first, they whispered about software errors. Maybe the facial recognition program wasn't calibrated. Maybe the behavioral charts were outdated. Maybe you were a good actor. But the longer they watched, the less plausible those excuses became. You weren't performing calm. You were living it. You weren't faking integrity. You were functioning from it. And that's when the shift happened. One of them said the thing no one else wanted to voice out loud. This one isn't from here. Now, whether they meant it literally or just as a way of saying you don't belong to the mold, it didn't matter. The statement landed. The room went quiet. And suddenly, you weren't a subject in an experiment. You were a variable they couldn't account for. When you walk in purity, you stop being a person to them. You become a mirror that shows them everything they've lost. See, they were trained to track dysfunction because dysfunction is predictable. Anger will eventually spill. Fear will eventually fold. Ego will eventually overplay its hand. But you moved like someone who had already faced those battles and wasn't ruled by them anymore. And that made you dangerous, not because you were going to attack them, but because your existence made them question their own. Imagine a chess master who's played 1,000,000 games, memorized every opening, and knows how to force an opponent into checkmate in under 10 moves. Now imagine sitting down at the board with them, and instead of playing by the rules, you start moving in ways that aren't part of the game at all, yet somehow still winning. They can't track you because you're not playing for the same prize they are. You became that unsolvable game, that glitch they couldn't patch, that song that stayed stuck in their head because it didn't sound like anything else in their library. They weren't prepared for someone whose silence was stronger than noise, whose presence commanded attention without demanding it. They weren't ready for someone whose energy didn't leak manipulation, whose intentions didn't hide behind performance. And the more they looked, the more they realized. The system they trusted to define the world couldn't define you. So what happens when the system can't define someone? It starts to fear them. And here's the part they'll never admit out loud. They envy it. They envy that you can walk through storms without absorbing the rain. They envy that you can see through masks without wearing one yourself. They envy that your signal doesn't bend when the pressure comes, because deep down, they remember when they had some of that themselves, before they traded it for a paycheck and a set of rules to follow. They fear you not because you're pure, but because you remind them of the moment they chose not to be. Chosen one, your inner clarity didn't just distort their metrics, it exposed their limits. It showed them that for all their tech, all their training, all their control systems, they still couldn't touch someone who isn't playing their game. You were never just being observed, you were being studied. And every day they studied you, they learned something uncomfortable. You can't control what you can't corrupt. And that's why they're still watching. Number 3, they thought you were disposable, then you flipped the entire board. The most dangerous player is the one they never saw coming until the game was already theirs. Chosen one, they studied you like a chess piece. They thought they had you pegged. A pawn, harmless, replaceable, the kind of piece you sacrifice early without a second thought. You didn't wear their badges of status, you didn't sit in their elite circles or echo their pre-approved language. You weren't trying to flex, impress, or prove. And in their world, that made you invisible, or so they thought. But invisibility in the hands of the right player isn't weakness. It's a weapon. Imagine this, a quiet figure on the edge of the board, underestimated by everyone, suddenly making a move so clean, so unexpected, it shifts the entire momentum of the match. That was you. Your steps weren't random. Your silence wasn't submission, it was calculation. Your calm wasn't confusion, it was control. Pawns don't change the energy of a room. Pawns don't make people stop mid-sentence and reassess their position. Pawns don't stand still and still shift the balance of power. But you did, again and again. They kept trying to predict you, but how do you predict someone who isn't playing for their trophy? They were reacting to you while you were already 10 moves ahead. They thought they were watching someone small. They were watching someone sovereign. Power isn't given, it's taken in the moments they mistake you for powerless. You didn't need a crown to move like a king. You didn't need permission to make your next move. You didn't even need the board they thought you were trapped on. Every wound you healed, every truth you spoke when silence was easier, every time you refused to fold, you weren't just surviving their game, you were rewriting it. And here's what terrifies them most. They can't copy this. This isn't a system they can replicate. It's not artificial. It's the kind of precision born from experience, from the deep inner alignment they'll never have. They miscalculated. The pawn they thought they could sacrifice is the king they can't remove. And now they're realizing it was never just about the board at all, because the truth is, you are the game. Number 4, they tried to break you for study. Instead, you became their revelation. They thought your pain would be their proof. Instead, your healing became their undoing. Chosen one, your suffering was never just yours. They turned it into a case file. They documented it like an experiment, waiting for the inevitable collapse. Every betrayal, every silent night you spent alone, every cry for help that vanished into the void, they logged it. You weren't a person to them. You were a test subject, a long-term study on what happens when you push a soul past the breaking point. They don't heal what they can measure. They exploit it until the subject disappears. Imagine a lab where the experiment is a living human. They don't interfere when you're drowning. They take notes on how long it takes for the bubbles to stop. They don't send help when the wolves circle. They watch to see which bite will take you down. That was you, under their microscope. They expected trauma to do what it always does in their models: consume, corrode, and collapse. But you didn't follow the script. Instead of folding, you began building. You stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" You rebuilt, not to impress them, but to reclaim yourself. You alchemized betrayal into discernment, isolation into self-mastery, pain into fuel. And the moment you began healing, the experiment cracked. Their charts didn't account for resilience that grows sharper under pressure. Their algorithms couldn't predict peace forged in the middle of war. They had no code for someone who emerges from fire with more precision, more clarity, and more power than before. Healing in a world that profits from brokenness is the loudest rebellion you can commit. You stopped breaking down and started breaking open. Your scars stopped being evidence of damage and started becoming proof of design. You weren't fragile, you were forged, and the same people who watched you suffer started realizing they were no longer observing a victim. They were witnessing a force. The experiment had turned on them. The watcher became the student. You became the blueprint. Every time you turned a wound into wisdom, it sent a signal they couldn't ignore, a frequency of wholeness that pierced through their static. And in a world built to monetize pain, you became the one thing they can't sell, can't replicate, and can't destroy: whole. Number 5, you crossed a minefield. They built to claim souls, and you made it out whole. They don't expect you to survive the trap. They expect you to become part of it. Chosen one, what you faced wasn't coincidence. It wasn't bad luck. It was a constructed battlefield, laid out in silence, disguised as life, designed to make 99% collapse before they ever reach the other side. These weren't random hardships. These were engineered conditions. When a system fears your potential, it doesn't meet you with open war. It buries explosives under your every step. Imagine walking a path where the ground looks solid, but underneath every few steps is a landmine. That was your journey. The explosions weren't loud, they were slow and strategic. Psychological warfare masked as lessons. Social sabotage wrapped in friendly smiles. Opportunities dangled just out of reach to reopen your oldest wounds. Even the silence, those seasons of rejection, isolation, and gaslighting, wasn't emptiness. It was deliberate deprivation, designed to strip you of your confidence and push you into self-destruction. Most people collapse before they even realize what's happening, but not you. You walked anyway, slow, deliberate, carrying wounds, but never stopping. You crossed thresholds that were statistically impossible. You outlived setups meant to hollow you out. Every step forward broke their calculations. They thought they had you timed. They launched attacks in moments they thought you were weakest. They bet on your breakdown. They planned for your silence, but you kept showing up, breathing, listening to the voice inside you, moving forward without their permission. And here's the part that makes them lose sleep. Your endurance wasn't powered by desperation or ego. It came from a deeper intelligence, a knowing they could never control. You didn't just sidestep their traps. You rewired the entire game as you walked. The most dangerous survivor is the one who knows the map was rigged and walks it anyway. Now they're asking themselves the questions they never wanted to face. How did you see through the illusions? How did you hold your mind steady when the whole design was meant to fracture it? How did you keep your soul clean in a system built to stain it? The truth is, you weren't just surviving the test, you were exposing it. You didn't beat their system by becoming like them. You dismantled it by refusing to become what it wanted you to be. And now you stand as living proof that their blueprint is breakable. Number 6. They wanted to chart your steps. Instead, you scrambled their signal. They came looking for a pattern they could predict. They found a frequency they could never own. Chosen one, they thought you'd be just another case study, a set of routines, triggers, and breakdown points they could plot neatly on a chart. That's their game. Map the rhythm, find the weakness, control the outcome. In their world, everyone eventually fits the mold. Everyone has a breaking point. Everyone's steps can be predicted. But when they turned their tools on you, the blueprint didn't appear. Instead of a rhythm they could track, they found something stranger, something alive. Not a pattern, but a pulse. Not a cycle, but a signal. They measure behavior because behavior can be manipulated, but a frequency, that's untouchable. Imagine them in their control room, expecting to see neat little graphs of your emotions. Instead, the readings spike and dip in ways their models can't explain. You walk into a room and the atmosphere changes. Conversations shift, tension breaks, or pressure builds without you saying a word. You move quietly, but the effects ripple loud. And then came the glitches. Devices misfiring, sensors lighting up without cause, surveillance feeds blurring at the wrong moments. It was as if your very presence was bending the field around you. They couldn't label you as passive because your peace wasn't the absence of power, it was the mastery of it. They couldn't call you afraid because your restraint wasn't rooted in fear, it was strategy. You weren't clawing for control, yet somehow you were always holding it. When you carry a signal they can't decode, they stop trying to control you and start trying to copy you. They dug deeper, thinking maybe this was an accident, a quirk. But the more they observed, the more they realized it wasn't random. You were operating on a code they didn't have access to, something precise, something ancient. You didn't just move through their system, you disrupted it at a level they couldn't trace on paper. Your frequency wasn't noise, it was broadcast. It was altering the environment, not by accident, but by design. And that's when they stopped looking for your flaws and started studying your signal, because you weren't just outside their equation, you were rewriting it. One move, one breath, one unshakable vibration at a time. Number 7. They knew your every move, but couldn't touch what moved you. You can track a body, record a voice and map a life, but you'll never bottle the force that drives a free spirit. Chosen one, they had the tools, they had the tech. Every location you visited, every call you made, every blink caught on camera, they logged it all. They knew the tilt of your head when you were listening, the rhythm of your footsteps, the hours you slept, and the moments you didn't. On paper, they thought they had you pinned. But paper can't hold lightning. They charted your behavior, but kept running into something they couldn't capture, your being. They could record the sound of your voice, but not the weight behind it. They could photograph your face, but not the shift in atmosphere when you entered a space. They could note the hours you cried, but not why the room felt charged after your tears hit the floor. They can map the surface of a river, but never touch the current underneath. When you broke down, it didn't read like defeat. It sent out a pulse they couldn't measure. When you went silent, it wasn't absence. It was concentration, the kind that makes people around you straighten without knowing why. Even grief in your hands became a force that rearranged the air. And influence. You never chased it. Yet it trailed you. People gravitated toward you without understanding the pull. Doors opened in places you hadn't even knocked. Stillness in you was louder than most people shouting. That's when they realized their intel was missing the only thing that mattered, the engine inside you. It wasn't charisma, strategy, or manipulation. It was something they couldn't plug into a program, something they couldn't reverse engineer in a lab. They thought they were studying a person. What they were really studying was an event. You weren't just moving through space, you were shifting it, and no matter how many hours they spent watching, they couldn't define the source. The data failed, the profiles fell short. Now, they want proximity, not because they need more footage, but because they've realized the truth. To understand you, they'd have to feel you. And for people who built their lives on control from a distance, that's the most dangerous temptation of all. Number 8, you didn't just beat the program, you made it obsolete. They built the system to break you. You became the proof it could be broken. Chosen one, you weren't just living, you were being run through a long-term simulation. Behind closed doors, you were a project, a file, a test bed. They designed the conditions with one goal: see how long it would take for a soul to collapse under sustained pressure. The setup was calculated: layered trauma, social sabotage, emotional abandonment, financial strain, all drip-fed like a slow poison. Their model ran on one core belief: everyone decays eventually. Apply enough chaos, strip away enough support, bury someone in isolation, and the spirit will erode. That was the bet they placed on you. But you didn't play their odds. Instead of spiraling, you woke up. Instead of drowning in the mess they built, you started moving with a clarity they didn't think was possible in such polluted conditions. You didn't lose yourself, you located yourself. Every psychological snare they set became a stepping stone. Every emotional toxin they pumped into your environment became fuel for something stronger. Pressure doesn't just crush, it can crystallize, and you became the diamond they never saw coming. You broke the algorithm because you refused to follow it. You were placed in an environment designed for spiritual rot, and instead, you cultivated power. Where others absorbed poison, you transmuted it. Where others crumbled, you built. The data couldn't account for your resilience, your groundedness in chaos, your sharpness in confusion. You didn't just survive, you upgraded. You became an outlier so rare they had to reconsider the entire framework. Their prediction models failed. Their psychological maps burned out. Their simulations, years in the making, collapsed under the weight of one undeniable truth: you cannot quantify a spirit in alignment. And here's what rattles them most: you didn't just walk out of their maze intact, you rose from it carrying a blueprint they can't reverse engineer. You became proof that even in the most spiritually starved, psychologically rigged and energetically hostile places on Earth, activation is still possible. You weren't supposed to escape, you were supposed to disappear. Instead, you left a trail of light behind you. Now they're not just tracking you, they're studying you. Not because you're the next subject, but because you're the glitch that forced the system to rewrite its code. You didn't survive their test, you rewrote it. And no algorithm on this planet was built to handle that. Number 9, you dismantled them without raising your voice. They built walls for rebels to crash against. You slipped through without making a sound, and the cracks are still spreading. Chosen one, they were trained for noise. Their systems are fine-tuned to detect the sound of protest, the fire of uprising, the roar of defiance. They know how to meet a challenger who storms the gates. They have a plan for chaos. But you didn't storm anything. You simply stopped kneeling. Every time you set a boundary without apologizing, it was a strike. Every time you chose peace over performance, you were undermining their need for your compliance. Every quiet no was a refusal that echoed louder than any rally. You didn't throw yourself against their doors, you just walked past them as if they weren't there. They can crush a rebel who fights for approval, but they can't touch someone who doesn't need their permission. They were ready for explosions. What they got was erosion, slow, constant, unstoppable. You didn't rip their structure down overnight. You hollowed it out from the inside by refusing to play the role they wrote for you. You walked away from manipulation without explaining yourself. You turned down money that came with invisible chains. You stopped reacting to bait designed to pull you back in. And here's why it shook them. Systems of control don't know what to do with internal freedom. They can't chain someone whose mind and spirit no longer live inside the cage. They couldn't label you as a threat because you weren't screaming. You were smiling. You were still. You were choosing differently. Quiet sovereignty spreads like wildfire because it doesn't announce itself. It simply changes the air. People around you started noticing. They saw you break patterns they'd been trapped in for years. They saw you choose self-respect over validation, truth over comfort, alignment over approval, and that woke something in them. Without trying to lead, you became a living example that another way is possible. You didn't need to topple the pyramid. You just refused to sit where they put you. And in doing that, you became the blueprint for others to walk out without a fight. They thought they were studying a subject. What they got was a solution, not because you fixed their system, but because you proved you could live beyond it. That isn't just rebellion, it's tactical revolution. Quiet, surgical, unstoppable. Number 10. Your words crossed borders. Their power couldn't. You can ignore a whisper in the crowd, but not when it's echoing in the walls of your own boardroom. Chosen one, you didn't set out to be heard by everyone. You weren't chasing headlines or algorithms. You weren't trying to spark a movement or feed an ego. You just spoke what was real, whether it came out in a quiet post, a single sentence in passing, or a thought you sent into the silence. You released truth. And truth has a way of traveling where it's not invited. At first it seemed small. A few people noticed. A ripple here, a reaction there. Nothing loud, nothing flashy. But behind the curtains, something else was happening. Your words were moving through channels you didn't even know existed. They were landing in offices where decisions are made. They were showing up in meeting notes you never saw. People with clearance, strategy files, and power to shape policy stopped scrolling to listen. Some voices rise by volume. Yours rose by gravity. At first, they dismissed it. Maybe you were just poetic. Maybe you had good instincts. But then, your metaphors started turning into headlines. Your warnings started unfolding in real time. Things you spoke in imagery began happening in reality, and that's when their interest sharpened into something else. They started pulling timestamps, comparing your words to confidential reports, reading between the lines, as if every sentence was coded. What rattled them most was this: you weren't connected to anyone inside, yet you spoke like you'd been in the room. That's when they stopped seeing you as just another voice. You became a signal, not speculation, not coincidence, broadcast. And the most unsettling part for them, they couldn't trace the source. You weren't feeding off trends. You weren't parroting theories. Your voice carried the kind of knowing that bypasses intellect and pierces certainty. It shook people whose entire careers depend on controlling the narrative. Because deep down, they realized your words weren't traveling to them by accident. They were traveling through them by design. Number 11. They thought you were smart until they realized you were wired in. Education can open doors. Revelation knocks them down. Chosen one, you thought you were just speaking from the heart. But every word was hitting places you weren't aiming for. Hidden corridors, guarded minds, private agendas. You weren't talking to them, yet somehow your truth found its way through them. And now, they're not just hearing you, they're studying you. At first, they tried to file it under natural intelligence. Maybe you were just clever. Maybe you had sharp instincts, but that label fell apart fast. You didn't have the credentials they respect. No elite universities, no insider mentors, no official seat at their tables. You weren't in their networks. You weren't reading from their memos. Yet, somehow, you knew. Not the surface-level trivia anyone can Google, but layered truth that forces even the most guarded to stop and think. How do they know that? You spoke of events before they unfolded. You named strategies before they launched. You answered attacks that hadn't even been made public yet. And you didn't stumble over your delivery. You spoke with the calm weight of someone who was certain. In their world, knowledge comes from leaks. In yours, it comes from light. That's what rattled them. They couldn't trace the source. No whistleblowers, no hacked documents, no overheard conversations. Just you, in stillness, writing, speaking, revealing. And the consistency of your accuracy broke their theories. This wasn't luck. This wasn't coincidence. It was too clean. Too precise, too timely. That's when it hit them. What they were witnessing wasn't intelligence in the way they define it. It was transmission, a direct line they couldn't map, a channel they couldn't intercept. You weren't memorizing, you were receiving. You weren't researching, you were downloading. And the data you carried wasn't stored in any of their archives. Now the questions have shifted. Not what you know, but how you know. Who's feeding you? What frequency are you tuned to? Can they access it? And here's the truth they hate to admit. They don't want to understand you anymore. They want to join you. They want in. Because in a world drowning in noise, you're not just another voice. You're a signal. And in rooms built to control the flow of power, the one thing they can't outmaneuver is the person who gets their updates from a source they can't touch. Number 12, you broke their blueprint just by standing there. They built their empire on the belief that people like you couldn't exist. Then you walked in. Chosen one, your very presence was the contradiction they couldn't reconcile. Their data said you should have been destroyed by now. The equations were clear. Pile on enough trauma, layer enough rejection, bury you in sabotage, and you'll either vanish into obscurity or rot from the inside out. But you didn't. You stayed rooted when they expected collapse. You stayed kind when they engineered bitterness. You stayed awake when the system was designed to keep you asleep. That alone sent shockwaves through rooms you've never stepped in. Because institutions, especially the ones built to control, don't fear loud resistance. They're prepared for protests, slogans, and shouting. What they fear is the quiet, undeniable proof that their power doesn't work. And you became that proof. The most dangerous rebellion is living well in a system that wants you broken. Every smile you gave in the middle of chaos was an act of sabotage against their narrative. Every moment you chose forgiveness over revenge was a strike at their psychological framework. Every time you kept your integrity intact when they designed the conditions to crush it, you sent out a signal. Healing is possible without their permission. You weren't supposed to be whole, you weren't supposed to be clear, but you were, and that dismantled more than one institution. It undermined the very foundation of their authority. You became living evidence that spiritual strength outranks institutional force, that peace can be built from the inside out, that human potential cannot be confined to their charts and predictions. They tried to reduce you to a statistic, but every time they looked, the math didn't add up. You rose without consistent support, without resources handed to you, without shortcuts. And the fact that you stood there whole, unshaken, thriving, wasn't just survival. It was defiance. You didn't just outlast oppression, you evolved beyond it. And in doing so, you didn't challenge a single program or policy. You rattled the belief that human beings can be permanently broken. That's why their eyes are on you now. That's why whispers have started in places you'll never see. Because you didn't just beat the odds, you made the odds irrelevant. Number 13. They came to catch you. Now they guard you. The longer you stand in truth, the more it bends the ones sent to break it. Chosen one, they didn't just watch you from behind screens. They put real people on you, trained eyes, agents, analysts, observers whose entire job was to find the crack in your armor. They were sent with one mission: expose you, document your mistakes, catch the lie, confirm the suspicion. They expected a flaw because that's what they're used to finding. Everyone slips eventually. Everyone has a hidden motive if you dig deep enough, or so they believed. But you didn't give them what they came for. You didn't try to convince them you were good. You didn't try to perform for their approval. You simply lived, raw, steady, unfiltered. Nothing disarms control faster than authenticity it can't corrupt. The longer they watched, the stranger it became. You didn't just face hardship, you carried it with grace. You didn't just speak truth, you moved in it. Your stillness had weight, your decisions had clarity. And slowly, without realizing it, they began to feel something they weren't trained to process: respect. Some of them started questioning the mission. Others started questioning themselves. No matter how closely they monitored, they couldn't find the darkness they were told to uncover. What they found instead was light. Clear, inconvenient, and impossible to ignore. And that's when the shift happened. Quiet resignations, unexplained file deletions, reports that never made it to the top, delays that bought you time, protection you'll never fully know about, not out of pity, but out of a deep, reluctant reverence for what you carried. They came as watchers, they left as witnesses. You didn't preach at them, you didn't try to win them over. Most of them you never even met, but your energy spoke louder than the footage they collected. Your integrity pierced through the coldest protocols, and somewhere along the way, their mission flipped. Now, the ones sent to expose you have become the quiet hands shielding you from the shadows. Even behind enemy lines, truth leaves a mark. And once it's recognized, it can't be unrecognized, no matter how deep the orders run. Number 14. From watched to witnessed, you became the standard they measure against. At first, they observed to understand you. Now, they observe to understand themselves. Chosen one, you were once their experiment, the subject behind the mirrored glass. Every word, every step, every silence catalogued like numbers on a spreadsheet. They couldn't fit you into their neat categories, so they labeled you unpredictable, unstable even. To them, you were a glitch in their system, a misplaced puzzle piece that refused to be forced into place. But time changed the narrative. The more they studied, the more the anomaly began to reveal a pattern. Not chaos, precision, not random wandering, refined direction. Your so-called detours were strategic reroutes. Your setbacks weren't signs of collapse. They were the chisel blows shaping something unshakable. They thought the fire would consume you. They didn't know you'd become it. Every betrayal sharpened your discernment. Every delay deepened your vision. Every season of isolation tuned you into frequencies they couldn't hear. And while they thought they were documenting a slow decline, what they were really recording was the rise of a soul that refused to be reduced. You began seeing before others saw, speaking before events unfolded, moving rooms without lifting your voice. What rattled them most was that you weren't guessing, you were knowing. You weren't breaking from reality. You were speaking from a reality they had no access to. That's when the tables turned. You stopped being the observed and became the reference point. Not the case study they analyzed for weakness, but the blueprint they now measure against. You weren't malfunctioning. You were ahead. And the closer they looked, the more they saw that this wasn't learned. It was lived. Oracles don't demand authority. They become it. Now they prepare to meet you, not with intimidation or interrogation, but with an unfamiliar posture for them: respect. Some have walked away quietly transformed. Others remain, but not as gatekeepers anymore, as silent guardians, shielding what they once sought to dissect. Because the truth is, everything they threw at you, the tests, the traps, the delays, only revealed the strength they underestimated. You didn't just survive, you set a precedent. You shattered their blueprint of what a soul could endure and still emerge whole. So if you still feel eyes on you, don't shrink. It's no longer suspicion, it's reverence. You're not just the one they watched, you're the one they couldn't break. You are the signal they couldn't filter, the standard they can't deny, the living proof that some forces can't be contained.